Welcome to Talking Jazz. My guest today is vocalist, harpist, or harpist vocalist Destiny Muhammad, and she's tuning in from Oakland, California to talk about her music and artistry and also advocacy in a lot of regards. So, welcome, Destiny.
Hey, thank you, Monica.
It's so good to have you. We got to collaborate a little bit a couple of years ago on a project advocating for girls in jazz and doing some concerts. There's a lot of very special memories and a lot of thoughts that I have about you and your music that I want to put out there and share.
Well, I really appreciate you actually calling me on to be on this auspicious journey with you. Yay.
It's a wonderful journey. First, give us just a little synopsis of who you are and how you came to the art. We'll talk about the special story on how to get further a little later, but just a little intro on your work.
I am a full-time performing, recording, and now curating artist living in the Bay Area. My main element is voice and harp, and jazz is one of those things I want to say had been around my peripheral a large portion of my life. And in 2008, I said I have to really get focused on it. And it has become the journey and my way of advocating for myself, but it's also for my people through this beautiful art form known as jazz by most of the world.
That is excellent. Yeah. And saying I'm a full-time performing artist, I mean, that's a major deal to be able to say that, because it's a tricky world to navigate and it takes a lot of guts, a lot of entrepreneurial skills, a lot of willingness to take risks to function in that world. Talking about that, right? You know, we're going to work our way towards the first one to listen to, which is G-Dub's Livery, which talks especially about those skills. So talk about this play and how you got commissioned to do this music.
I got commissioned by a woman who's a former poet laureate of San Francisco, Devore Major, to score the music for her play called Classic Black, The Voices of African Americans in 19th century San Francisco. This play is around African Americans that are not known about in San Francisco that became millionaires pre-Civil War. Most of the time when folks are talking about Black folk, and particularly during that time, it's usually just enslavement. But the stories that came out of this talked about how they came out of enslavement and were able to create wealth for themselves, and also became philanthropists and advocates for Black people who were being brought into the San Francisco Bay Area at that time so that they could get their freedom. And so when Devore came to me and asked me to write something, I chose to focus in on three people, and G-Dub, as I call him, George Washington Dennis, who became a millionaire in San Francisco by way of being a horse whisperer. And he had been brought to California by his slaver daddy, Green Dennis, who opened up a saloon in San Francisco. George asked if he could not call him master in front of all these people. And the man thought it was funny. He said, sure. And then George, as the gutsy entrepreneur that he was becoming, says, what would it cost to buy my own freedom? And he was told by this man, it'll cost you $1,000. And this was the gold rush in the Wild West. He actually is able to manifest $1,000 in 90 days. And buys his freedom. The story is pretty in-depth. He buys his mother's freedom, brings him back up from the South. He had been trained to train horses, or the horse whisperer, and that is how he became a millionaire, advocating for Black folks when Black folks were brought into town, advocating for their freedom. He had a livery in San Francisco, and people would go to him because he took the best care of the horses, and so henceforth G-Dub's Livery.
Wow, what a story, right? So how do you tell a story like that in music? How can we hear that when we listen to it?
For me, when I'm writing music, I am listening, especially when I'm writing about ancestors, I'm doing my best to see if I could hear their voices and what they would say. And so I got the first three notes, do-do-do, and I don't know why that sounded like George to me, but when I got those first three, I said, is that it? And he said, that's it, you got to run with that first. And so, do-do-do, and I kept playing it, and I got do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then it came, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And I don't know why that sounded like something that George would say to me, but I trusted that. And that's how the full version of it came out.
That's amazing. I love that you're given this phrase that is told to you that I think we should dive in and listen to that now that we have it in our ears. Do do do. I mean, it's available out there. It has some of your favorite partners on it that are playing, right? I think you said Doug Ellington on trumpet.
Yes.
Frederick Harrison on piano.
Yes.
And Leon Joyce Jr. on the drums, and Mari Kashima Williams on the bass. And of course, you are on harp. For somebody to find it out there, what would we look for?
So it got reimagined with the name of Festival. So it's available as Festival 1 and 2 on iTunes. CD Baby had a subsequent label, if you will, called Here Now, and it's available there as well. And you can always hit me up on my website, destinymuhammad.net, and I believe that the link is there as well.
All right, let's have a listen and imagine the story of the Horse Whisperer, G-Dub's Livery. was G-Dub's Livery, selection commissioned and performed by my guest today, Destiny Muhammad, who you also heard on harp. We just heard the story of how you were inspired by stories of these millionaires, but obviously the harp is not the most common jazz instrument, and there's very few jazz harpists out there, but one of the most well-known, I would say, being Alice Coltrane, and you put out a whole album inspired by her music. Tell us a little bit about the relationship of you to Alice Coltrane and the inspiration.
In 2016, I got an email from SF Jazz, which is like the West Coast Jazz at Lincoln Center, asking me if I would be willing to come in and curate a concert for Alice Coltrane with a focus in on her landmark LP, Journey into Satchitananda. And so that entire album I curated. It was a wonderful 2 concerts, sold out, to the point where the venue in SF Jazz, they have several, and the one where I was at sold out twice, and folks couldn't get in, and so they were hot about it. And SF Jazz is in San Francisco, so my folks in Oakland was hot, talking about, when you gonna bring it to Oakland? We didn't get a chance to see it. So when I chose to bring it back to Oakland and rent a venue, my husband and I rent a venue ourselves, I said, I want to expand that conversation and look at some of her other albums that also featured harp and or piano. And so when we went to go look at the El Daoud and the Huntington Monastery by Alice, I started to also hear the voice in her music that predated her relationship with John. And many folks don't know that Alice was a fierce pianist, jazz pianist, prior to her coming to relationship and in marriage with John. As a jazz trio band leader, she was just fierce. I went to go listen to, I don't recall any of her recordings prior to John, but when I went to hear the El Daoud and the Huntington Monastery, I heard that jazz trio. And I said, I want to reimagine that, not necessarily with harp, but expanding on the idea. Via Seven Dagar was initially piano, bass, and drums. I threw in Laura Kleinman on flute and Richard Howell, the fierce, on saxophone. And I put those 2 together with my drummer, Leon Joyce Jr., and my upright bassist, Chico Lopez, and the pianist, who I think she be channeling Alice too. And she sat down. I was like, oh my gosh, Alora is really fun. And I said, I want to hear this. I said, but I want you all to trust me, because you're going to have to trust me, because I'm going to direct. I'm not going to play. You're not going to play? No, but I'm going to direct, and you're going to have to trust me, because there are portions where I want folks to fall out, and you're going to have to watch me. We did this live. And Laura kept questioning, how does that work? I said, you're going to have to trust me. What you'll hear on Via Savandagar for me was a throwback of Alice pre-John, but then a reimagining of her if she were physically with us, and saying, I want to touch on that, and I want to expand it by bringing the sound of a John Coltrane into it, and perhaps the sound of the flute, because I think that Yusef Lateef had the chance to actually play with her. Becca time, and sometimes she goes out there more. I just want to take my shoe off and hit her, because she's just going, and I love that. So it was literally like bringing in John and Yusef Lateef as a part of that sonic experience, and my job was really to be the Alice, the director, without playing. That's what Via Savandagar is for me. And Alice just fierce, because just what she did on the harp, I call her the pentatonic empress, because she's imagining possibilities on harp, and with all that incredible glissandi, that rich sound, and then just her incredible improvisation on her own, expanding upon the idea of what the European classical sound would sound like on the instrument itself.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to know what a musician she was herself. Often she's just viewed as, oh yeah, she played with John Coltrane and she was married to him. She came in as a musician of her own, and that's why John Coltrane was impressed.
That part many times gets left out, and it's imperative for me to also to remind people, even going back in time where Alice was the sought after gospel pianist back in Detroit. See, folks don't know that. I mean, she was so fierce on piano that choirs were coming to her, and she was doing this circuit in the Michigan area. So she was already established as a fierce musician. It's just that when she came with John, I want to say there are even segments where she was saying that she was just so enamored with John. When he stepped off the planet, it pushed her right in the front where she had to step up again as that fierce musician. And I'm proud to be able to say that she never felt overshadowed by John. She knew that she could do it. And then when he joined the Ancestors, she had to step back into that realm as the individual. So yes, I do have the chops. I do understand the music. I know how to co-create it myself. I'm aware of this. And John was my fabulous husband who was fierce as well. We walked together, not one behind the other.
Let's listen to this with the nod to her artistry and to what she contributed to jazz, period, no matter who he was married to or not. So this is Via Sivandagar, and this features Richard Howell on the sax, Rebecca Klein on the flute, Leon Joyce Jr. on the drums, Laura Klein on piano, and Chico Lopez on the bass. And this is from your Alice Coltrane tribute by my guest, Destiny Muhammad.
5, 6, 7, 8. Sometimes silence is good. 5, 6, 7.
That was Via Sivandagar. That was a composition by Alice Coltrane, and it was directed by my guest today, Destiny Muhammad, from her tribute concert to her. We talked a lot about her and her influence on you. Doing what you do takes a lot of guts, takes overcoming barriers. Usually the harp is also associated a bit with a heavenly classical instrument, and finding its space in jazz. I remember we did this Jazz Girls Day together, and the girls were there. We were sharing our stories, and you stood up and you told us the story about the jam session and how you had to make yourself known, and my jaw just dropped. So I would love for you to tell us that story again.
I've been invited to a jazz session by a wonderful ancestor now, Khalil Shahid, who is the founder of the Oaktown Jazz Workshop. He saw me playing at a farmer's market and he said, "Hey, you should come." Incredible jazz trumpeter who had played with Buddy Miles and a few others and was now focusing on youth. And he said, "You should come to this jam session I got going on at Bluesville." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to get a chance to play with the cats." And so here are literally, as many times we still know that the jam sessions are primarily still moved by men. There's not a lot of men. So they had Ed Kelly on organ and Mark Williams trumpet and Walter Salvage on upright bass, Khalil on trumpet, and I don't know who all else in this smoky, wonderful jazz class. And I think I'm going to sit in with the cats. They've already been playing and they feel good and they know one another. My ears are just really starting to hear the progressions in jazz. Khalil goes, yeah, we got this badass jazz harpist. She's going to lead it off. Oh my God, my heart was thumping because I just knew I was just going to get a chance to sit in. He asked me to lead it off. And I had just learned a little bit of Freddie Hubbard's Little Sunflower. And I start out with that do-do-do-do-do. Where I'm positioned, I'm on the floor where the other cats are on this stage. And it ain't a big stage, that's why I'm on the floor. And Ed Kelly looks down at me and growls. Grrr. And he leans on the organ and just starts going fluid, just fast as he can be. And they just run. And I couldn't keep up. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. And I was just like, oh. And I felt like a little kid amongst the big kids, and you spin them around and you throw them around until they throw up. And I said, whew. And everybody laughs except for me. And I didn't know if I was going to laugh or cry. And what I'm aware of in this breath, that many times that became the time for somebody to say, I quit. It was my birthday. And I look at everybody and they're cracking up and they're laughing and stuff. And I said, I don't know what just happened. happen, but one day I will. And when I do, I'm going to hire all y'all. And Khalil looks at me and he says, hey, I got this jazz workshop where I'm teaching kids how to play jazz. You should come. I wasn't quite ready to do that then. That was like 1998, and I wasn't ready to do it then. I just get my cheese back up, you know. In 2008, I finally got the nerve up, and I said, Khalil, I said, is that still open to me to do that, to come? And he says, yeah. And the beautiful thing is, my husband and I live in an art center, and he was literally 3 floors down teaching jazz to teenagers, youngsters who didn't even know how fierce they were, to an Ambrose Akamusiri, who now is with Blue Note, a Dana Stevenson, who's now, these are folks that came out of that workshop. And so he says, yes, please come. And I think he thought I was only going to come once. For the next 4 years, from 2008 to 2012, and just prior to his ascension, I took jazz workshop with him for 2 hours every Wednesday. And I would keep that little body of works that we were working on, and I was building a set list and practicing so I would learn how. And it wasn't like anybody else was in there even playing strings outside of Apocondria, who is now the executive director, playing upright bass. So literally, they would take a piano chart and put it in front of me and say, have at it. Or they just give me a C chart and just say, figure it out. And Khalil would come over, hey, figure out the chords. Figure out the chords. And even the youngsters didn't treat me as though I were an adult. They say, hey, you gotta study like us. I will tell you, that didn't frighten me at all. If anything, I was glad that they were seeing me more as a contemporary so that we could all learn together. And I will tell you, that jam session was one of the best schools. It can be hurtful because people sometimes, I want to say people have probably adjusted their mentality a bit now, but back then folks weren't that nice. And even pre-me, they really weren't nice. They would cuss you out on the, off the stage, talking crazy. Folks have started to adjust those attitudes a little bit, but it can still be very scary because just jazz and European classical music are meshing and parallel. It takes so much focus that we really don't have any time for nonsense. Am I right in that?
You're very right in that. It's often not clear that jazz is not just something you start playing and making stuff up. It's a language, and it's an intense language to learn. It takes its time and an investment. And, you know, we even have the Charlie Parker story where he got the cymbals thrown at him to get off the stage at a jam session because he wasn't ready yet. And he took it as a chance to really start to dig in and learn his skills, you know, and that's a very, very hard thing to do. Accepting failure is extremely difficult. I can certainly attest to that. For most of us, it means we'll just give up and not do it and say, well, maybe I wasn't meant to, you know, that's not for me. They don't want me to stand up and say, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna learn this, and one day I'll hire you, which you definitely did.
Probably most of them I got a chance to hire. One moved out of the state. I don't know if he was moving because he knew I was coming for his. I love what you said about it being a language, just European classical music. These are our languages. It really behooves us, and I speak a lot for myself, to come to these languages with the same humbleness and respect as we would come to French or German or Spanish. We learn the fundamentals. I think of many jazz standards that have had great success. Many of them for me have become the fundamentals because they have pointed the direction to some of the larger works, but those fundamental compositions for me are priceless.
Let's talk about algorithms then, and maybe that leads to it. But this is actually really cool because it's something that you just did on solo harp all by yourself, and that's hard. You know, it's very exposed to do something yourself with no accompaniment, and it'll come out soon. So we'll listen to that. Do you want to point us to some things to listen for in it?
With algorithms, for me, it felt like, and I want to say that this came out just as the pandemic was really starting to take over. We were really having to all really migrate online. Algorithms is one of those terminologies that I've learned in regards to how one engages with social media. And so it just sounded, for me, it sounded like that. Like one day you know what you're doing and the next day you don't really know what you're doing when you're doing social media. But this sound, again, I generally trust what I hear, and that becomes the catalyst or the foundation. And so algorithms was really basically me acknowledging that I'm watching the movement of things happening online as we move through through this pandemic and trying to move through as safely and healthily as possible. So algorithm is really my interaction with my whole online experience and how those things go up and down.
Well, here it is. Algorithms on solo harp, performed by our guest today, Destiny Muhammad. Algorithms, performed by my guest today, Destiny Muhammad, and available on November 14th on Bandcamp. Look for it. We talked about so many important stories and spiritual things. You know, I think your spirituality really comes out, and how you're open for receptions from the above, from beside, from beyond. You are in the Oakland community, and you said you live on top of an art center. You do these events, and you're really a community activist. Tell us about these events and the spoken word that you put together there.
I live downtown Oakland, when Oakland is the home of the Black Panther Party. I will tell you, I had never expected or even really all the time see myself and as an advocate. I just feel like sometimes you just have to speak out, and sometimes that speaking out comes through my music. I had been commissioned, me and 7 other composers, to write a piece called "What Does Your California Sound Like?" It was from the Intersection for the Arts, which is based here in California, the California Shakespeare Theater Project. What does your California sound like? And I said, my California sounds like corner 14, which my husband and I live on the corner of 14th and Alice, downtown Oakland. And it has this spot, especially where we live, has the word has been used, gentrified. I saw it coming, and my husband did, because many times since we live downtown, I can go downtown, purchase things, take my clothes to the cleaners, but I would see little inklings of change happening. So when the big change, when it started to happen big, the roots had already been set. Many folks didn't see it because they'd come in and out of our building, and they just come, get in their car and drive off, but we could see just the little changes happening, where the developers were starting to come in with red spray paint and spray on the ground. They said, oh, there's some changes are going to be here. Directly across the street from where we live, there was a parking lot that we would actually pay for parking there, had 72 places. Well, that parking lot now is a 5.5 story apartment building directly across the street. So now parking has been minimized where we could park, as well as our entire neighborhood. And we've had folks who have moved into the neighborhood that have no idea of the rich cultural history here. As I shared, we live live at a place called the Monika Herzig Center for the Arts. For anyone who may know Oakland, this space was initially known as the Alice Art Center, which was initially also known as the Oakland Women's Club. Women were in this building in 1922, and they were doctors and lawyers and accountants and such, and they would walk up and down the street here taking lunch breaks and such. Now then it moved into becoming the Alice Art Center with a rich focus on African diasporic drumming, dance, folklore, classical African dance and music, drumming from all over the continent. And so the neighbors, not being informed of what this was, would attempt to call the police because they didn't hear the sound of the drum as music, they heard it as noise. And so in Corner 14, when I'm starting out and speaking, I'm talking about that 6/8 drumming that you hear at the top of it. That is imperative because it signals what happens here, and it is absolutely not going. And in this building, we've had dance companies that, as I shared, we had to have a wheelchair dance company called Access. Would expect somebody in a wheelchair to say, damn it, I'm still going to dance in the chair. Incredible internationally. So we have that, and tap dancing. The change for the building got named after an incredible man by the name of Monika Herzig. The previous incumbent mayor was trying to put all of us out of the building so he could turn it into the Oakland School for the Arts, which has subsequently went on and opened up its own 3-4 campuses outside of here. And we marched down to City Hall and said, we ain't leaving. What you need to do is to make sure you take care of us in here because we represent the arts in Oakland. We represent the rich cultural history that's here. And that's why folks come here, especially downtown. So in the midst of that back and forth with that previous mayor, Monika Herzig, who is the founder of Fui de Congo, his children have continued it, was leaving the building on Father's Day early in the morning because he had been working on a project, a dance collaboration that he was going to do. And he leaves the building on Father's Day and he's driving down the street, and Oakland has a series of one-way streets, and a drunk driver hits him and he is ejected off the planet. Girl, I ain't never seen nothing like this. The building, the bottom floor of the building, for 40 days and 40 nights was covered in fruit and flowers and images of Monika Herzig. City officials would not come in here. They're not coming in. It was the most incredible thing, and you could feel Monika's energy. The community came out and said, you have to change the name to represent his rich legacy and history. And they did. To the city of Oakland's credit, they did. I'm grateful. And so his children, who are now grown people, because they literally were like late teens, early 20s when came off. They have continued in his rich history and culture. His son, Kiazi Herzig, has a new drumming CD out. His daughter is taking folks back and forth to the continent where the daddy was from and showing them the foundation of what she knows. That's just one of the children. The children they're doing such phenomenal work. That man's legacy is not dead. It is rich and alive. So Corner 14, babe, is me merging that sound of African drum with the elements of its child called jazz.
How cool. Let's have it. So we get to experience that right now. Corner 14, it features all your favorite collaborators with Leon Joyce Jr. on drums and Mark Kashima Williams, Fred Harris, Doug Ellington on trumpet, and of course yourself on the spoken word and the harp. So here it is, Corner 14.
If y'all shed a little light on me, I thanks you kindly. What does your California sound like? What does your California sound like? The California Shakespeare Company, in conjunction with Intersection for the Arts, posed this question to 7 composers. The subject: what does your California sound like? I was blessed to be included in this commissioning. My California sounds like the Monika Herzig Center for the Arts. This is the home of the drum. Don't get it twisted, it is the home of the drum. Right here on 14th and Alice, AKA Corner 14. Drums from every spot of Africa are housed here and played simultaneously. The sound of ancestor Monika Herzig teaching Congolese drumming, dance history on the 2nd floor. The sound of jazz coming up from the 3rd floor with jazz ancestor Khalil Shahid teaching jazz fundamentals to Oaktown Jazz Workshop. Oh, y'all know that. Yes, he was teaching jazz to some youngsters that included Blue Note recording artist Ambrose Akasamur, and Monterey Jazz Festival composer, young composer winner Matt Wong. The sound of the Oakland Youth Orchestra having auditions. The sound of dancing wheelchairs and tap dance shoes, funky freestyle and conscious conversations. Corner 14 is the sound of the Chinese character for crisis and opportunity. As Oakland experiences its own paradigm shift from Oaktown to Tech Oakland, the sound of startups and stand-downs, Pride Fest and Warriors!
And you heard my guest today, Destiny Muhammad, on introductions, on the harp, leading her ensemble on her advocacy project. You know, we heard earlier about your influence with Alice Coltrane. Of course, there's John Coltrane, and we all were, during the pandemic, deeply into what can we create, what comes to us. You know, it was just a time to rethink.
It really called on all of who we were and who we're imagining ourselves to be. Whatever the next phase is, I don't know, but it's not going to be what yesterday was.
And we learned a lot. It was a tough way of learning, but we'll take it forward. I so appreciate you chatting with me today. That was so inspiring, and I hope we get to play again sometime. All right, let's listen to one last one. Here is Coltrane. This features you on harp and vocal, and it's a brand new piece that came out of the pandemic. Thank you, Destiny, for sharing with us today. Here's Coltrane.
Hear the sheets of sound, it's the sound of Coltrane. You hear the sheets of sound, it's the sound of Coltrane. You hear the sheets of sound, it is Coltrane. Hear the sheets of sound, it's the sound of Coltrane. Coltrane, train coming, train coming, train coming, Coltrane, train coming, train coming, train coming, Coltrane, train coming, train coming, train coming, Coltrane.
Thank you for listening to Talking Jazz today. My guest was composer and harpist Destiny Muhammad. Tune in for Talking Jazz every Thursday at 11 a.m. and every Monday at 7 p.m. right here on WETF 105.7 FM in South Bend, Indiana, or online at WETFthejazzstation.org. Also find videos of previous shows on YouTube on the Monika Herzig channel. That's MonikaHerzig. Subscribe to get the newest updates. Thank you for listening.